Welcome to the Muju Business Podcast, where we try to provide as much value as possible to entrepreneurs and business leaders. I'm Dylan, and this is Steve. And today our podcast is about how to find meaning in your business. So I think to start off, a big one to think about when it comes to meaning is kind of starting with the beginning, because that meaning is somewhat easy to find. I think if you're doing the right business, and it was for us, there's a lot of passion, in those early stages. There's a lot of fire, there's a lot of hunger, and early on in the business, if you're starting and you're starting from scratch, there's not a ton of momentum, right? Mm-hmm. And there's not a lot of action going on. There's not a lot of work that isn't self-created. Like, you have to go out and make those things happen. Yeah. So early on in the business, there's a lot of passion. In those first few years, you're kind of going all in. And what starts to happen, especially if you go full-time and it really becomes a true business that runs your life, you dedicate a lot of time, and those things that were once fun just to do for the sake of doing become work.
Yes.
And that's really where things start to kind of get difficult and the rubber really meets the road. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about kind of that transition, because I know you and I have talked at length about, that early stage, in 2016 for us, when we were just super excited, gung-ho about doing anything, to, about 2-3 years later when we were full-time and really, kind of in the thick of it, and things really got difficult.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head in the sense of, in the beginning, it's super exciting and fun, and you'll drop everything to go work on your business, but then eventually it does turn into work. And I think it's pretty cyclical. I think that happens as your business matures in general. So for instance, when we were first getting started, I would literally jump out of bed at 7 a.m, hype to go to apartment complexes and hand out flyers and knock on doors and say, guess what we do? We do moving, we do junk removal. Now you couldn't pay me to do that.
Right,
You know what I mean? It's just a lot. But back then, once we started to get more jobs, that work didn't seem as much fun because I really wanted to just do the jobs. And then the marketing aspect became more of I kind of need to do this, but I want to go work. Right. And then the employment factor, where we started to replace ourselves on the truck, and that, you know what I mean? So it's constantly a stepping stone from one step to the other. And I think it's super important for people when they start to, for lack of a better words, feel stuck in the current position that they're in, to start to think about that next level of where you want to get to. So when we didn't necessarily get stuck in the early days of being in a certain position, because we were constantly on to the next, on to the next, on to the next. But then, we hit a little bit of a rough patch, and we got kind of stuck in the management phase.
You hit a ceiling, right?
Yes.
That's what it's called.
Yeah. Yes. And when we hit that was a hard one to break through. It was hard to release responsibility to a manager, because you don't have total control.
Right.
For a number of reasons, it became hard to convert that thought of, what I'm doing right now to looking towards the future.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a great way to put it. And I think what happens too is, you get kind of so invested in it because you love it so much, which is great. And then you still love it, but what you find out is that those responsibilities that you thought everything would be great are real responsibilities. They actually are things that are difficult to do, right? Once I have employees and people working for me, and wow, they're doing stuff, and that comes with its own set of problems and challenges and work, and those are great. Those are fun challenges. They're fun things to deal with, but they are still real responsibilities. You do have to do those things, So I think what you have to do is try to understand that I think meaning kind of comes on the intersection of discipline and passion, right? And there's kind of a give and take on both of those sides, right? So I think when you're starting, you just have all this passion, and then you'll hit a point where you have all this kind of discipline, you have to do it. You got to get things done. You got to get things done. And you feel like you work for your business and you never get a day off because your boss never gives you a break because you're the boss, right? That's how at least I felt, and I know you felt the same way too. So you have to try to do, and I think we've done a good job of doing lately after hitting that ceiling. So for anybody in this position, don't feel alone, because we were the same way.
For sure.
But you have to, like you said, you have to look at the long term, and they have to make sure that, come hell or high water, you carve out time to say, I want to work on these things that I find meaningful and I find that are good for the long-term view of my business and myself within that business. Don't you think?
For sure. And I think when you get to that point, understanding what current day-to-day things you have to let go of in order to work on that.
Yeah, be willing to delegate those things, even though it's going to be tough, and even though there may be somewhat of a sacrifice in quality, not in the sense of that things are going to go badly, but there's no way your employee is going to do as well as you do every single time.
I was going to say,
not possible.
You're sacrificing perfection.
Correct.
Or apparent perfection.
Yes.
Because when we did the jobs, I mean, we probably never once had a damaged plate ever.
Yeah.
But that didn't mean it was perfect. That was just what we were focusing on to say that's perfect. You know what I mean?
100%. Yeah.
But yeah, so that's what I would say.
Yeah. You have to be willing to kind of let go of that illusion of this perfection. You're not really going to achieve that no matter what. If you build a business of significant amount, so you have to find, okay, I have to be willing for things not to be perfect every single time. And, I can manage those problems as they grow, right? And I think that's where you find meaning, is not focusing too hard on making sure everything's perfect. It's on understanding that, I have to do these things, but I also get to work on the things I want to, right?
100%. Yeah. And just to circle back on that real quick, I also think there's a lot of self-awareness that comes into it, because we're biased in the sense that we want to create a large franchise organization.
Right.
So where we find meaning is going to be different than someone who just wants to run one truck a day and have an awesome, perfect moving company, right? Like that person, they're not good. If they are trying to build a huge corporation, they're not going to have any meaning in it.
Yeah.
Because they're not going to feel like they're doing what they should be doing.
Yeah.
So that self-awareness aspect too, because I think in that meaning, you have to balance your ambition, because that can get in the way.
Right.
It could fuel it, but it could also be a detractor
Yeah.
from your meaning.
Yeah. That's a great point. Yeah, you have to you basically you have to determine your meaning by kind of thinking, okay, what does the end goal actually look like for me? And then kind of walk through what that looks like on
Yes.
your day-to-day, and understanding that even if I'm not there today, I can get there. Because if your goal is to only work 15 hours a week and make what you're making now, that's totally different than
Way different.
like us. I'm trying to have 150 franchisees in our system in the next 10 years. That's a totally different goal than somebody who who just wants to make sure they're making what they make today, but they only have to work half the time, which is totally fine. I think that's a great goal, and you're going to find meaning in taking those steps to remove yourself but keep everything under control.
100%.
Where, if you're us, you're not going to find the same meaning in that. You're going to get bored, right?
Yes.
Where we find meaning in the growth, in the pushing, meeting new people and expanding. So yeah, that's definitely a great point. And then kind of understanding, like I said, I think just the passion and discipline intersection, like just thinking about that all the time. There's things you have to do, but then try to make sure you make time for things that you get to do.
Yes.
Right. Yeah, that's important. Cool. Yeah, I think that was just a good idea of how you can find meaning. There's no one way to do it, but there's definitely a couple ways to think about it, so you can kind of find meaning in your business or your work.
For sure. So, and for the people listening, carve out some time in the next week to think about what your ideal life looks like, especially in your business.
Yeah.
And then work towards that.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to take maybe a step back to go forward. And
exactly.
by a step back, I mean maybe pass on a job or pass on a client or push that call to later, and maybe they'll cancel. But actually take those 2 hours to say, okay, I'm going to focus on what would really drive my meaning, in the business, and that would ignite my passion. If you do feel a little stuck.
Definitely.
Yeah. So awesome. Yeah. Until next time. Thanks, guys.